Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we're going back a few categories, back to the Taming time signature category. I've been meaning to do this for a while, and it actually came up a couple times recently, so I thought it would be time to do this. We're going to talk about free time in finale. In other words, writing music without a meter. And this is a little bit of a tricky topic, so bear with me as we get through this. This might end up being a longish video, and possibly I might end up having to do some crazy edits to this. So just bear with me as we're going. So first of all, you can see what I'm showing you here, which is sort of a finished version of what I'm going to show you how to do. And this is a finale file that I did using just some free time. And you can kind of see what I'm doing with the violin and the piano part here. You know, this looks like all just one piece, and it's like one measure that goes all the way to the end of the second line, and it gets a little bit complicated. On the second page, I've sort of done the same thing with the first two systems here, but I've added some dotted bar lines. I've added some tick bar lines in the second part of this, you can see here. And then towards the bottom, I've actually put in this little cadenza thing that I'm going to show you how to do as well. So there is a lot going on here, so I just want to dive into what this looks like in finale. So here's the finished file here, and here is the blank file that I'm going to start with. So the main idea about doing free time in finale is that I've mentioned this before, but finale works in frames, and every measure on every staff is a frame. So what I'm highlighting here is a frame. That's a frame, that's a frame, that's a frame. Every frame has to be defined with a number of beats in finale. We can't have an open-ended frame and say, okay, I just want to put in notes in this frame until I've decided I'm done, and then I'll put a bar line. It doesn't work like that in finale. We have to define the frame with a parameter of beats in it, and we just can't get around this. So the object here is that you don't want to fight this. You want to use this to your advantage. What makes all this stuff possible is the flexibility that finale has in doing things like hiding bar lines, hiding time signatures, manipulating the time signatures in certain ways, and manipulating the bar lines in certain ways. And that's really the main objective here, is to learn how to use all the tools at your disposal having to do with the time signatures and the bar lines, those two things in particular. And the way that you do this really depends on the context. So if you look at this first quote-unquote measure here, and if I highlight this in the finale file, you'll see that it selects the whole thing. So now you know, just by looking at this, that this entire line here is one bar, because I've just clicked once and you get one bar, right? And the second line is also one bar. Now, the way that we hide time signatures and manipulate the time signatures and hide bar lines and all of that stuff really depends on context. So if you look at these two quote-unquote measures, what you'll notice is that the violin part and the piano part in this first part of it sort of line up. In other words, there's the same number of beats, you know, in the piano part as in the violin part. But if we come down here and look at the second one, you'll notice that all I have here is a whole note with a fermata on it, and this is sort of more of a cadenza-ish kind of thing. Now, this is probably something that you may also want to do. So this is going to be done in a separate way. Now, if I go over here to the second page, I've got bar lines here in the piano part, and so now you can see that I've taken the same material and actually have divided it into three pieces. It's just that I'm hiding the bar lines only on the violin staff, right? So this is going to require a different method of hiding bar lines. On the second line here, I've done almost the same thing. I'm using this little tick bar line. It might be hard to see right there, but this is divided into three parts for the violin. Because of that, it also has to be divided into three parts for the piano, but you can see that it just kind of looks like one bar, and it looks like just a 4/4 bar for the piano. So there's a lot of tricky manipulations going on here that I'm going to show you. So let's just dive right into it so we can sort of understand what we're doing. So first of all, as I already said, this is one measure, so we can get rid of these three measures and just start with a single blank measure here. The idea behind what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this measure the way it's written, and I'm going to figure out what the meter is, as it were. Obviously, there is no meter, but there is a meter underneath this bar. And if I look at this, what I can do is kind of count up all the eighth notes, and I've done that already. I know that there are 21 eighth notes. So what you could do in your blank file here is just set up a meter that's 21 eighth notes. and that you'll be good to go. That's your start. Now we'll deal with hiding the meter in a second. Now this will work. The issue with this is that you're not going to quite get the beaming the way you want. So if I'm just going to enter eighth notes here to demonstrate this. I can keep going, but you'll see that it won't beam automatically. So this is not, this is a quick solution. You can manually beam these notes, but that might take more time than you want. So we can get clever with setting up the time signature here. So instead of just plain 21/8, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to break this down into a composite meter, and this is where it's going to get a little bit crazy. I'm going to call it 1, 4 plus 6, 8, oops, plus 3, 4, plus 3, 8, plus 1, 2, actually. All right, so this will give me my 21/8 notes, and the quarter notes and the half notes will beam appropriately. That's just the way this works, but you can see that the eighth notes are all still individually flagged, so that's not what we want to do. We can fix this. I've already gone through this in, I think it's the second lesson in the Taming time signature, but we can make this 3 plus 3 within this little box, and that will fix the beaming for this second group right here. The problem is when we get to this group here, which is just an isolated dotted quarter note, there's no way to actually do that here. You know, if we put 1/8, we're only getting 1/8 note. If we put 3/8 notes, we get them individually beamed. So this is where the EDUs actually come into play. So this is a little trick. I'm going to switch over to EDUs temporarily, and I'm actually going to make this 1, and 1024 is a quarter note. So what I need is a quarter note and a half, which would be 1536. All right, so now you can see that I'm looking at this thing here, which is just a dotted quarter note, which is going to beam as 3/8 notes. All right, so this crazy complicated thing is the meter that I'm going to set up for this first bar. It looks crazy, but don't worry about that because we're going to totally hide this, and we won't ever see any of this, okay? So we click OK, and we get that crazy time signature. And now we can go through and enter these notes. So bear with me, I might fast forward this a little bit. And if I did that right, you'll see that my beaming and everything will kind of match up with the one here below. And let me just, so I can do this, let me do the piano part as well. So bear with me again. All right, and I won't bother with all the other markings here, but you get the idea. So basically, with this crazy time signature, I was able to enter all of these notes the way I wanted to without having to manually connect the beams and all that stuff. If this is too tricky, you know, you can always just put it as 21/8 and then just manually beam the notes. That's entirely possible as well. So obviously the next two things that we need to deal with here is the time signature and the bar line at the end of the bar. And this we're going to do all in one shot in this particular instance because we can, and it's easy to do this. We're going to go into the measure tool, and we're going to double click this one long measure that we have here, and we're going to do two things. The first is that we're going to go over to where it says bar line, and we're going to choose invisible. And the next thing we're going to do is go over to where it says time signature and do always hide. So in one shot in the measure attributes, we should take care of both of those things. And so now we have what looks like free time. We know for a fact that this is a 21/8 measure, but if you look at this, obviously it looks like free time. So I mentioned that the key to this is really hiding the bar lines and the time signatures as needed. And what I just did with the measure attributes is sort of the first way to do this. Now what you have to realize is that there's different ways to hide the time signatures. There's different ways to hide the bar lines as well. This is just one way. And with the measure attributes, this way will do it up and down the entire score for the entire measure. So in this case, we're hiding the time signature for this whole measure. If I had a bunch of different parts, it would apply to all of those parts at once. And the same thing with the bar lines. When we get into a little bit more complex stuff, and we want to parse it out a little bit more, so maybe we're only hiding the time signature for one part, then that's where we're going to have to deal with staff attributes and staff styles. And in the staff attributes, we actually have the options for time signatures in scores and parts to hide. We also have the option here for bar lines. So these two places, the staff attributes and the measure attributes, you have to have a handle on how these things work and when and why to use these options versus doing it in the measure options. Again, if you're doing it up and down the whole score, it's easiest just to do it with the measure attributes because it will do it all at once. You don't have to worry about staff styles for every single part and all that stuff. All right, so that's the first half of this free time measure. Let's take a look at the second half. And we have something similar going on with the violin. This happens to be 18/8 notes, but you can see the piano part only has a single whole note, right? So obviously 18/8 notes is way more than a whole note. So there's a few different ways to do this. The first way you can do this, honestly, is just to do the same thing that I just showed you with the 18/8 notes, set up your meter the way you want it to, put in the whole note with the fermata, and just hide the rest. That's absolutely one way to do this, and that would totally work. Another way to do this, which I think can be a little bit slicker, particularly if you have a bunch of these going on at the same time, is to actually do this as an independent time signature. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go up here. Again, I'm going to delete these 3 bars because we just need 1 bar here, okay? And what I'm going to do is actually set up the violin time signature first. And for this, we're going to do a different composite here. Oh boy, let's get rid of all of this so we can start afresh. Bear with me. There's a lot going on here. All right, so I know this is, let's see, 3, 4 plus 3, 8, and I'm going to do that same trick with the EDUs in a second. Plus 3, 4 plus 3, 8. All right, so let's use the EDUs, and now we'll go to 1536, but we just want 1 and 1, 1536. All right, so 3, 4, 3, 8, 3, 4, 3, 8 to get this beaming correct for the violin. All right, and bear with me. I will enter these notes, so hold on. I may fast forward or just edit. Hold on a second. All right, that looks pretty good. There's my violin part. And again, with the piano part, we can do what I said. We can actually just put in a, let's see, a whole note here. And put in a whole note in the left hand, which I believe is that. There we go. And you'll see that you're obviously left with all these rests. So again, you can just go in here and hide them if you want. Easy enough to do that, and you know, you're good to go. And of course, we'll deal with the time signatures in the same way we did before. But what I want to show you is that there's a slightly different way to do this, and this could be handy if you have a bunch of these bars in a row where you have the same type of thing for the piano. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to set up a independent time signature staff style. So I'm going to go into my staff tool, define staff style, new, call it independent TS, copyable. And over here on the bottom left, we're going to choose to check the time signature so that the staff style here will produce an independent time signature. And now we have to apply it, and we're going to apply it to both staffs here. Independent time signature, there we go. And you get this little gray bar telling you that you have an independent time signature. Now, when you have an independent time signature, what you want to do, what you'll see in the time signature tool, first of all, is a little box here. This is indicating that these 2 staffs are now independent in their time signature. And so we can choose to get rid of all of this. One more time, just get rid of everything here. Oh, I could have just pressed the clear button. That would have been easier. And make that 4/4. Now, again, that will only work on the top one because I've only changed the meter on the top one. So we have to do it on the bottom as well. Composite, clear. That's much easier. There we go. 4/4. And now you can see we have 4/4 and this crazy one on the top. And of course, we're showing the courtesy time signature because the independent time signature ends at the end of this bar because I only applied that staff style to these 2 bars, right? So that's why it's going back to the time signature that exists for the main part of the measure here, right? So we'll get to that in a second because on the next system, actually, I can just show you this. Next thing that we want to do is actually put this whole thing in 6/8. Let's just do that real quick here. Let's just put this in 6/8, clear this. And we'll go to 2, dotted quarter notes to 6/8. And this will change both the violin and the piano part to 6/8. And now we get the appropriate courtesy time signature over here of 6/8 for both the violin and the piano. Now, of course, we can just go into our piano part, since we just have a 4/4 measure, and enter one whole note there in the right octave would be helpful. There we go. And one whole note here. And that's all there is to it. So now you don't have to worry about all of those rests. All right, so the last thing we have to do is the same thing we did on the previous measure, where we're going to go into the measure tool, double click here, and again this will apply to every staff in this measure stack, and we're going to do, this time we want a double bar line at the end, but we also want to not show the time signature, so we'll choose always hide. And there you go. Now you have this whole thing. And if you look at this in one whole piece, it does kind of look like it's one long open measure, right? There's no bar line at the end here. We get to this next bar line, or we get to this next piece of it, and it goes until there's a double bar line, and then we get into our 6/8 time signature here. So this is basically how you do this. This is one way to do this. All right, and then let me just go in here real quick. Let me insert some measures. I'm just going to put in my little Irish jig. I'll just copy and paste it in here for now so that we don't have to deal with all this. But this is just regular time signature, right? So now we've gone into normal time, and we're set up with 6/8. We've got our thing here. I'm just going to copy and paste this into here to save us a whole boatload of time, and there we go. All right, so let's look at the second piece of this. So on the second page of the sample, I have basically the same two bars, except done slightly differently. If you look closely, you'll see that there's a dotted bar line here, and here, but there's no bar line here, okay? So this is gonna have to be dealt with a little bit differently. And you can see in this particular file, I've got this actually separated into 3 different bars. So that's the first thing that we're gonna wanna do, is make this 3 bars instead of 2. And now we have to analyze this and look at this and say, okay, well, this is really an 8/8 measure. So let's start there. So we're going to want to do basically an 8/8 measure. And of course, I could do it like this again, 8 eighth notes, right? And that'll work. But we can get clever with the composite meter if we want to. So in this case, I'm going to do basically 1/4 plus 3 plus 3 over 8, and that should give us this, these beamings the way that we want to show them, right? And there we go. And then the other thing I want to show you is I want to show you another way to hide the time signature, right? Because obviously we click OK and we get this crazy time signature, which we don't want to see. Again, we could do this with the measure attributes and check this here, but there's one other way to do this in the time signature tool that's also handy in certain circumstances. So we can go in here, and if we choose more options and use a different time signature for display, what we can do is actually just call this 6/8. Oops. 6/8, there we go, 2 dotted quarter notes. And when we click OK, it's going to disappear. The reason why it's disappearing is because the last bar that existed was a 6/8 measure. So you never repeat a time signature if it just happens. So that's why this the time signature itself disappeared, right? The actual time signature is this crazy 1/4 plus 3 over 8. But what's showing, quote unquote, is the 6/8 time signature. And obviously it's not showing because it doesn't need to. I guess that's a double negative of sorts. Anyway, this is actually another way to do this. All right, so moving on, I know that the second measure is actually just a plain old 3/4 measure. So we'll clear that and we'll call this 3/4. And again, I'm going to leave this option checked to show the 6/8. And it will keep that time signature from appearing. The next one is a 3/8 plus 2/4 situation. So again, let's do 1/1536 plus, EDUs, of course, 1536 over 2/4. And now we do this, 1536. There we go, 3/8 plus 2/4. All right, click OK. Click OK. Again, also showing the 6/8, so it doesn't show up. And we're good to go. So the difference between this bar and the first time I did this is that I have these dotted bar lines. So the way that we're going to want to deal with this is actually change the bar lines for the whole thing for all three measures. So you can just select all three, double click, and now you're editing the measure attributes for all three measures. You can see that it measures 11 through 13. And I'm just going to choose the dashed bar line, and that will give you those dashed bar lines. Now, the other piece of this is that if you notice here, I don't show the dashed bar lines for the violin, just for the piano part, right? Actually, let me do this first. Let me just copy and paste all this stuff in. All right, so now you can see this material is here, but I still have to deal with the dashed bar lines here. So this is where I'm going to use a staff style, because again, staff styles are going to be useful for doing things to individual staffs, right? So we're going to create a new staff style here, define staff style, new, and I'm going to call this hide bar lines. We'll make that copyable. And in the items to display, we'll just uncheck the bar lines option so that it disappears and click OK. And then, of course, when we apply that staff style, hide bar lines, you'll see them go away. So that's exactly how you do that. So now you're showing these crazy time signatures. You're not showing them by displaying the 6/8 from the previous measure in all of these. And you're showing different bar lines on different staffs here. So that's how you would do that. Now let's look at this second system here, because again, this is a copy of the second system here, except that the only difference here is that I've added these little tick bar lines, and you may not be aware that this is something you can do. There is a little tick bar line up here, which is exactly what it is, just a little vertical line on the top line here. So what's different about doing this here is that we can't really use an independent time signature in the same way as before, because now this whole thing has to be three different measures. If I want to have this little tick bar line here, I have to divide this into three measures, right? Which means that this has to be divided into three measures. Unfortunately, we can't have an independent number of measures per line like that. That's not a thing in Finale. So there's a vertical sort of grid to this, so that you always have these three bar lines here no matter what. Again, this is all about just tricking Finale into doing what you want to do without fighting the frames. All right, so real quick, let's put this together. I know that this first bar is actually a 4/4 bar, so we can go ahead and do that here. Let's call this composite clear, and we'll call that 4/4. Again, let's keep showing 6/8 so that it just doesn't show up, right? This next bar is 2 + 3 / 8, so we can do that here. Over 8, oops, 2 + 3, there we go. And again, show 6/8 so that it doesn't show up. And then the next bar is going to be 3 + 2 / 8, actually, so pretty close. And that should do that. And then, of course, we don't need this bar, so let's just get rid of that one. And then bear with me. I'm just going to copy and paste this material in just like this. Copy, paste. Let's copy this bar. Again, you're only copying one bar here. Okay, and then let's figure out how we're going to deal with these bar lines, because again, we just want the tick bar lines. So again, with this, we have to choose the bar line for the whole stack. So we're just going to choose these two measures, and we're going to choose the tick bar line. This last one, again, we're going to show the double bar line, because that's going to be the end of the phrase here. And so now we're pretty close. We have to hide these little tick bar lines in the piano part, but we also end up with these extra rests because, again, Finale thinks that there's 2 more bars here, which technically there is. So now we're actually going to apply 2 different staff styles. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 2 bars and use the hide bar line staff style. I don't want to do it on the 3rd bar because that would hide this double bar line, so that wouldn't be what we want. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 2 bars, and there is a staff style in here for blank notation all layers, and when you choose that, the rests will go away. So now I've got sort of 2 overlapping staff styles here, and you can see that I've just created exactly what I have down here. So I've got the little tick bar lines just for the violin, and this looks all like 1 bar line, or 1 bar. Again, we're just kind of tricking Finale into doing this because, again, this is 3 bars, even though it looks like 1 bar. All right, and then let's go down here, and what I want to do is I want to put in my 8 bars of Irish jig again. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change this to an actual 6/8 measure. let's clear this out. Make that 2 dotted quarters. And in this case, we actually don't need to show because this is, it's the same thing. So click OK. And you'll notice that, well, nothing's showing, right? Here, let me do something quick real first. Let me just copy and paste our little Irish jig into there. There we go. So this is right, except for we're not seeing the 6/8 measure. The reason for that is because these bars up here is displaying as 6/8, whereas this one is also 6/8. And again, the principle is if you repeat the same meter, it's not going to redisplay. So we have to force display the meter in just this one bar. And this we can do with the measure attributes again. We just double click in there. And instead of hiding the time signature, and instead of leaving at the default, which is show if needed, we're going to actually always show. So no matter what happens, this meter will always show. And now you get your 6/8. And because you've put it here, it also puts it over here as the courtesy at the end of the line. So sometimes you have to use the always hide. Sometimes you have to use the always show, again, depending on the different scenarios. All right, and then let's look at the final piece of this done file here. I've got this sort of cadenza sort of divided into 3 normal measures. And basically it looks like it's a 4/4 measure. In fact, that's kind of what I did here. So the piano parts here, these are 4/4, but these bars up here are different. I'm going to set up the time signatures in the blank document here to match this. So I happen to know that this is 9/8 for the first one. It is, what is this? This is another composite. It is 3 plus 3 over 8 plus 2 plus 3 over 4 to give us a crazy thing like that. And the next one is going to be 3 plus 4 over 8. So clear 3 plus 4 over 8. That should do it. And that will give us the meters here, and we'll click OK. And we don't need the last bar here. And then just like I did before, what I'm going to do with the piano part here is I'm going to create an independent meter. And so I'll go into here, my staff style, choose an independent time signature. And when you do that and go back into the time signature tool, you'll see that now you've got these little handles here indicating that these are independent time signatures. And we'll double click there to change 25 through 27 composite. Oops, we don't need composite. We need 4/4. There we go, 4/4 for all of those measures. And of course we have to do the same thing here. And we'll just choose 4/4. All right, so now we're good to go. And obviously the thing about the violin part is that we don't want to see the time signatures here. So in this case, I am going to actually use a staff style to hide the time signature. So this is going to be a new one. So we're going to do define staff style. And we could do it the other way actually, but I'm just showing you yet another way to do this. So create new, hide TS. Make it copyable, and we're going to uncheck it for the score and the parts, because you're probably going to want to see the same thing in the part if you're doing that. And once we've defined it, we will use it. And there we go. So now we have these crazy meters here for the cadenza for the violin, but these are all 4/4. And you'll notice that I'm also not showing the 4/4 here, right? So let's go ahead and also use the hide time signature in addition to the independent time signature here. And so now that will look the same. And hopefully if I did that right and I copy and paste all of this, that should do the trick. And the violin part here. There we go. And then the last thing you'll see is that now we're looking at the very last thing in the file is another 4/4 measure. So we've got this situation here. So this is really just easy because the staff styles don't exist on this next measure anymore. So the time signatures are locked together. So really all we need to do is just change this time signature to a plain 4/4 time signature, and we should be good to go. Now again, because this already was 4/4, it's not going to show this. So actually we do need to do always show here, time signature, always show. And there you go. And then just to finish out, we can just, if we want, just copy the last 2 bars here into the last 2 bars here. And we're done with that. All right, so yeah, there is a lot to this. Like I said, there's several different ways to do this, and it really depends on the context. It really depends on what comes before, what comes after, how you're managing these things, with whether or not you've got a piano part which is kind of sticking with these whole notes while you've got something else going on, or whether or not they're kind of in sync, whether or not you're using bar lines, in the same way or not, or doing it like this, where it's just all one piece. There's there's a lot of different ways to go about this, and really the trick to this is just figuring out what makes sense for the scenario that you're faced with. So, now that you have all of these tools, you have to kind of think through it and figure out and use the tool that's going to be best suited for that particular scenario. Again, the key is manipulating the time signatures and the time signature visibility. And there's like 4 different ways to hide the time signatures. You can hide it with the time signature tool. If you show the previous time signature in the display as section, that's one way to hide it. It's this part over here. Use a different time signature for display. If this is listed as the same one to the previous measure, it will hide. You can also hide time signatures with a staff style. You can hide time signatures with the measure attributes by doing it here. And also you can hide the time signatures globally for a entire staff with the staff attributes itself. So if I were to uncheck these guys here, this would actually hide the time signatures for the entire violin staff. So that's one way to do that if you know that this type of thing is going to be going on and on to the end of the piece. And same thing with the bar lines. There's sort of 3 different ways to hide the bar lines. We can actually choose the invisible bar line as the bar line itself in the measure attributes, or we could use, again, a staff style or a staff attributes. Again, with the staff attributes, you'd be hiding the bar line for the entire staff that you've chosen. So if I were to uncheck this, you would never see a bar line ever again in the violin part. Unless you reverse that with another staff style that shows the bar line. So a lot of different permutations of how this can be done. So it just takes a little bit of creativity, a little bit knowing about the tools that you have at your disposal. And once you do, you can create all kinds of crazy stuff in free time with all kinds of bar lines all over the place, however you need to do it. And let's do one final thing with free time. If you look at the Elaine Gould Behind Bars book, there is a notation sometimes that they'll use for free time where it's just an X time signature. So you can't really do that with the Finale time signature tool. There's really no way to do that. You can really only use numbers or the common or cut time symbol. There's no way to actually use an X. So if you want to have an X as a time signature, this has to be done as an expression. And I'm going to show you what I think is probably the best way to do this. So I'm just going to go into the expression tool, and I'm going to actually duplicate the tempo marks category. So let's go in here, call duplicate. I'm going to call this time signature for now. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to use Arial. You want to use like a narrow font, the narrowest font you can find. And I think Arial Narrow is a pretty good one here. And the size I want is 16. And I'm going to set up the positioning right in the category designer because I think this will be good. So we want, in the horizontal, we want left justification. We want horizontal alignment after clef key time repeat with an additional offset of 0.04. These are just the settings that I've found works for Arial Narrow size 16. Vertical alignment, we want to use a staff reference line so that it's fixed. We don't have to worry about it. And we're going to set this at negative 0.246. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create let's just use score list 8 and edit this. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it on all staves for the score and parts because we want to see this everywhere. And click OK. And that should do it. And then all I have to do is create a element here, and this is just going to be a capital X in the Arial Narrow. That's all there is to it. And if I assign that, it should give me that X time signature in the right spot. Now, obviously, there's an issue because the notes are not going to get out of the way. That's because Finale doesn't think there's a time signature here, which technically there isn't. There's an expression there instead of a time signature. So we do have to do something extra to this measure in order to get those out of the way. And the best thing to do is really go into the measure attributes again. And what we're going to do is add a little extra space at the beginning here. So just check that, and the amount that we want is, I think it's just 0.1 inches. Let's try that. Yep, that looks good. And so now you can see that you've got your little X time signature perfectly placed the way that Gould recommends between the second and fourth lines, and all is good to go. All right, so that's how you would do that little X time signature as well. All right, so yeah, that is a lot. Like I said, there's a lot to this. Hopefully this has been helpful. It's been crazy trying to figure this out. Like I said, I've been meaning to do this for a long time, but I knew how complicated this was. So I'm glad that I actually got around to it, and I'm glad that you all got to see it. Whew, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching once again. My name is Jason. Don't forget to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll see you soon on the next video, wherever we may go next. Thanks. I'll see you then.